Every once in a while, an earnings report comes along well, it's more than just numbers. It's a full-on drama. It tells the story of a company changing in a huge way, right in front of our eyes. And today, that's exactly what we're diving into. Teradyn's absolutely incredible quarter.
Okay, let's just start with the number that made everybody's jaw drop. In the fourth quarter of 2025, Teradyne didn't just meet Wall Street's expectations, they completely smashed them by almost $113 million. I mean, for a company in this industry, that is a massive beat. It's the kind of thing that tells you something really, really big is going on under the hood. And it wasn't just about revenue. I mean, listen to this quote from the CEO, Greg Smith. 41% revenue growth from the previous quarter alone, and their core earnings, the non-GAAP stuff, more than doubled. When a CEO gets to say that, you know the business is just firing on all cylinders.
So that brings us to the big question, right? The whole reason we're doing this explainer. A quarter like this, it doesn't just happen. So how in the world did they pull it off? What was the secret sauce?
And here it is. Here's the answer, all in one chart. The engine, my friends, is artificial intelligence. In a single 3-month period, the slice of their revenue coming from AI went from around 45% to over 60%. That's not just a little bump, that is a fundamental shift in the very DNA of the company.
Now, to really appreciate how massive this shift is, we've got to rewind the clock a bit. We need to look at what the old Teradyne looked like, because for years, their entire business was tied to a totally different game.
Take a look at this. Just a couple of years back, in 2023, their main business, testing chips, was all about mobile phones, that's 40%, and the auto and industrial sectors at 50%. And compute, the part that includes all the AI stuff, it was just this tiny little 10% sliver. And being so dependent on the mobile market, well, that created a huge headache for the business. They called it lumpiness. Basically, their money would swing wildly up and down depending on when the next big smartphone was coming out. It's just a really tough, unpredictable way to run a company.
So you can just imagine the conversations in the boardroom, right? The big question had to be, how do you break out of this cycle? How do you find something more stable, something that's actually going to grow consistently into the future?
Well, the answer turned out to be a huge, multi-year bet on AI. And look, this wasn't some snap decision. This was a slow, deliberate pivot they've been building for years. And what we're seeing now is that bet paying off in a spectacular way.
And they really went all in. I mean, they didn't just dabble. They shifted focus to high-performance computing chips. They went after the really critical AI memory market, things like HBM. They started testing massive systems for data centers and even got into robotics. This was a top-to-bottom strategic overhaul.
And all of that work, all that planning, it put them in the perfect position, right as this giant AI wave was starting to build. So let's take a look at the payoff, because it is wild.
The acceleration here is just staggering. We already saw that jump from Q3 to Q4, but look at their forecast for the next quarter. They think AI is going to be more than 70% of their sales. This isn't a trend anymore. This is a complete hostile takeover of their business model in the best way possible.
Okay, now remember that 2023 chart? Let's look at it next to the 2025 numbers. It's a completely different company. Compute has exploded from that tiny 10% to almost 50% of the entire pie. It's their biggest business now. And mobile, it's been cut almost in half. Their whole business is now way more balanced and hitched to the fastest rocket ship in the entire tech economy.
And just to really hammer this point home, their compute business grew 90% in 1 year. That's the kind of insane growth that totally remakes a company from the inside out.
So, yeah, the big pivot worked. But what happens now? What's next? Well, the company is so confident in this new AI-powered reality that they're actually changing the way they talk about their own future.
First off, in the short term, this train is not slowing down. Their guidance for the very next quarter isn't just good. They're forecasting an all-time company record. They're expecting to blow past the highest highs they ever hit during the big mobile phone boom.
And you can really see their confidence in this interesting little change they made. They used to give financial targets for, say, the year 2028. Now, they've shifted to what they call an evergreen model. They're setting goals based on the total size of their entire market. It's basically them saying, look, we're not tied to those unpredictable phone launches anymore. Our growth is now tied to the growth of the whole AI industry.
And this new model, it sets some seriously ambitious goals. They see a future where their entire market, the TAM as they call it, is worth $12 to $14 billion.
And when that happens, they're targeting around $6 billion in revenue for themselves, which is nearly double what they did in 2025. It's a huge, bold vision for where they're headed.
Now, we've got to be balanced here. The company was pretty clear that even with this amazing AI boom, it's not going to be a perfectly smooth ride up. The business still relies on a few very, very big customers, and that can still cause some of that lumpiness. They're even admitting they don't have a great crystal ball for the second half of the year. So it's a dose of realism, which is always good to hear.
So why are we spending all this time on one company that makes testing equipment? Why does it matter so much? Because this story, Teradyne's story, is a perfect little miniature version of the entire AI economy.
Think of the AI revolution like a giant iceberg. We all see the famous companies at the very tip, the chip designers, right? But underneath the water, there's this massive hidden ecosystem of tool makers and equipment suppliers and robotics companies that make the whole thing possible. Teradyne's success just proves how deep and how wide this AI wave really is.
And the scale is just enormous. We're talking about testing everything from these tiny little AI chips smaller than your fingernail, all the way up to the complex computer systems that are going to power the next generation of cars. Every single one of those parts has to be tested, and that demand is just exploding right now.
Which of course leaves us with the billion-dollar question. Looking at a report like Teradyne's, it really feels like we're watching a massive, long-term shift. But is this AI-fueled boom a truly sustainable new era for the entire tech world? Or are we just seeing the absolute peak of a huge, but maybe short-term surge? The answer to that is probably going to define the next decade of technology.